Where did it go wrong? Where did it go wrong? The thing about brand new signings is if you get it right, then you sign the right player and he fits in and he balls out. You're taking your team 2, 3, 4, 5 levels up. If you make the wrong signing, you're taking your team 2, 3, 4, 5 levels down. And then it's so difficult to get yourself back up. Why? Because there's too much finances involved in brand new signings. There's so much politics. Koopmeiners to Juve, it hasn't lived up to anybody's expectations. I think even Atalanta fans are watching him and telling themselves, you're not the guy that we saw in a black and blue shirt. He hasn't lived up to expectations. He hasn't lived up to the standards of a Juventus shirt. He hasn't lived up to the price tag. And it's now got into a stage where he genuinely looks like a massive hindrance on this team. He doesn't deserve to be starting. He probably doesn't even deserve to be on the bench. Yet he continues to play week in, week out. What I want to share with you guys is, I've been sat today telling myself, is Koopmeiners really that bad? Is he? So I now want to compare Koopmeiners to players that, one, play in a similar position to him. Two, that have played a similar amount of minutes to him this season, just so I can keep it fair. Three, they have similar responsibilities to him on the pitch. And four, these are players from the top 5 leagues. Now, these players can be from teams in the bottom half, from teams in the top half, but the one thing that's constant is they play in a similar position, they have similar responsibilities, and they've played the same amount of minutes. Let's look at this. The number 10 role, shall we say. So we're comparing now Koopmeiners to other players that operate in the number 10 role. Successful take-ons. On average, those players, 1.71. 1.71 successful take-ons this season. Koopmeiners, 0.55. Trust me, it gets worse. Progressive passes. I feel like this is the only one where he's performing on average. Progressive passes. Those other players, 4.45. Koopmeiners, 4.10. He's below average, but he's close. It's fine. Let him off with that one. Progressive carries. These other players, on average, 3.69 per 90. Koopmeiners, 1.9. And finally, the most important one. As a playmaker, you need to create opportunities. Shot creating actions. These other players, similar responsibilities and a similar amount of minutes to him, 4.02 per 90. Koopmeiners, 2.8. Now I want you guys to just pause this video and take in those numbers and ask yourself, has he really been that bad? Because I've just now compared him to 50 plus players. And like I said, some are playing for teams far worse than Juventus. But his numbers are not even on average. They're below average by a drastic amount. Now it's only right I refresh you guys' memory with why Juventus even signed Koopmeiners in the summer. Like, did he really impress in an Atalanta shirt? Yeah, he did. Last season, 17 goal contributions in 29 appearances. The season prior to that, 14 goal contributions in 32 appearances. Koopmeiners showed the whole world I can score goals, I can decide games, and I can benefit my team in the final third, season after season. So why hasn't it worked out at Juventus? In my opinion, from watching him at Atalanta and watching him at Juventus, the one thing I can tell you guys, even though he might occupy the same position on the pitch, I feel like his responsibility is completely different. In Atalanta, I never once looked at Koopmeiners and told myself, he is the playmaker of this team. He is the architect. He is the orchestrator. I never once told myself that. Why? That Gasperini system generates goal scoring opportunities. How? They push the entire teams forward. They press relentlessly. They force the opposition into errors and then they capitalize on those errors by having players that make the right decisions. But for me, Koopmeiners was a player that wasn't heavily involved in build-up like he is at Juventus. And there's a reason why you're beginning to see his flaws. At Atalanta, he wasn't really heavily involved in build-up. If anything, he was more the final action player. The player that gets onto the end of those opportunities. The player that makes the third man runs into the opposition box and scores the goals. The player that gate crashes the opposition box. That was Koopmeiners. I always looked at him as a final action player, but he helped the team in terms of pressing, in terms of winning his duels. But in terms of being the number one primary playmaker, it wasn't him. Atalanta don't have one playmaker. It's the system that playmakes for them. Juventus' system hasn't really found its feet. It's not really the most fluid. It's not really getting the best out of some of their players. And there's a reason why now the responsibility has been put on Koopmeiners to playmake. Because he occupies the area of the pitch of a playmaker, but he can't playmake because he was never ever the playmaker at Atalanta. But you see, with Koopmeiners, I really wanted to compare his problems at Juventus with his problems at Atalanta. And for me, I feel like the alarm bells were there even when he was playing well at Atalanta. Look at this. For me, these are the alarm bells. These were the concerns during his time at Atalanta. Number one, as soon as the ball got into the opposition half, he had a 70% pass accuracy. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you in congested areas, when trying to sustain pressure against the opposition, he isn't the best at retaining the ball. Why? Pass accuracy can be off. The weight of his pass, the passes he decides to make, all of those contribute to him giving away possession. Another thing is, on average, per game, he would lose the ball about 19 times. On top of that, 0.6 dribbles per 90. It tells you in congested tight areas where he now has to maneuver himself and get in and around players, he isn't the best. He isn't the best of dribblers in tight areas. Now that is something that can definitely hinder a player. And then on top of that, a 51% long ball accuracy. All of these things are essential for a playmaker. You need to be able to retain the ball. You need to have a good weight of pass. You need to have a variety of passes, whether it's short, medium, or long. You need to be able to dribble. These were all concerns during his time at Atalanta, but the system still brought something out of him. And there's a reason why, like I said, he was never ever the main playmaker. And finally, the icing on the cake. Recently, Motta has made some changes to Juventus, especially in build-up. What he's done is he's realised Gatti and Kalulu are not the most progressive. Great defenders, but not the most progressive. So what I need is a ball progressing demon in the middle of them. Locatelli has been constantly dropping in the middle of Gatti and Kalulu, and he is progressing the ball. He's done amazingly well, besides the 2 penalties, okay? He's done amazingly well. But guys, you can see from the screen, when you're now practically sacrificing a midfielder for him to drop and play in a defensive area of the field, you're now looking at Koopmeiners and telling himself, you now need to drop next to Thuram. And you now need to play and orchestrate in the second phase. It's all about having layers. Having players in the first phase, in the second phase, in the third phase. Koopmeiners is now required to drop and play next to Thuram when Juve are trying to play out of the back. But where the problem is, the second phase is so congested. The second phase is so congested. So many teams press in the second phase. That's where it's most aggressive. It's the most aggressive area of the field. Why? Because it's the midfield. That is where a game is won and lost. Koopmeiners getting onto the ball in those areas, he is really struggling. Congested areas require you to be a quick thinker. They require you to be a player that can dribble out of those tight areas, that can carry the ball through bodies, a player that can execute a variety range of passes, medium, short, long. He's really struggling. And there's a reason why, as of late, he's really looked bad. Now, in summary, it's been 6 months. But me personally, I look at his attributes, I look at his strengths, and I look at his weaknesses. And I tell myself, Motta, a manager that's looking to play total football, ball retention, playing out of the back, having players good in tight areas, having players that can retain the ball, a lot of elements of positional rotation and positional play. Does Koopmeiners have the strengths for a team with that goal, with that aspiration? No. And don't get me wrong, some players change with further coaching, further developing. But I feel like in these 6 months, you've seen he's really struggling to do what Motta is asking of him in the final third and in the second phase. And maybe, just maybe, it was the wrong player. It was the wrong signing. But that is based off what I've seen in the first 6 months. Make sure to let me know what you think of Koopmeiners in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on another one.